It goes something like this. In San Francisco, the copywriter and art director are waiting in the conference room. A client, Worlds of Wonder, would like to meet with the creative team who will be doing their new advertising campaign. 3 people arrive: the founder of Worlds of Wonder, his associate, and a gentle, quiet-looking man wearing a backpack that you might carry a child in. Sitting in the backpack, watching the world go by him, is Teddy Ruxpin. We would never keep Teddy in a box, the inventor says, setting the doll on the table. The inventor touches Teddy somewhere on his back, at which point Teddy starts talking and singing and playing music and just generally starts having a marvelous time. That's the most incredible teddy bear I've ever seen, the art director says. Oh, he's not a bear, the founder says. He's an Illiop. Stephen Kessler, Chiat Day, The First 20 Years.
The World of Teddy Ruxpin debuted in 1985, headlined by an animated talking toy, the first of its kind, and became an overnight sensation with sales in the millions. In addition to a plethora of merchandise that ranged from plush dolls to PVC figurines, Teddy and his friends quickly branched out into live-action television and an animated series, cementing a special place in the hearts of everyone who came into contact with them. As a child growing up in the shadow of Hollywood, Ken Forsse had aspirations of making it in the entertainment industry. He would eventually become an Imagineer who helped change the face of Disneyland. When Sid and Marty Krofft, at the height of their popularity, needed a seasoned artist, they hired Ken. But not even with such credentials could Ken have anticipated the global phenomenon that was the culmination of an idea first conceived as a puppet show, nor the quarter of a century it would take to realize his dream. And through it all, this visionary remained himself, a shy, quiet man who let his creations do the talking for him.
Hi, my name is Teddy Ruxpin. Can you and I be friends? Come dream with me tonight. Let's go to far-off places and search for treasures bright. Come dream with me tonight. Let's build a giant airship and sail into the sky. Let's watch the ground so far below. Let's watch the birds as they fly by. The butterflies in springtime will lead us on our way. Exploding dandelions will brighten summer's day. And if our dream's a good one, and if our dream is right, then imagination can be real if we will dream tonight.
As reported in the local newspaper by one Dr. Penoyer, Earl Kenneth Forsse was born on September 17, 1936, in Bellwood, Nebraska, to Edwin Centennial Forsse and his wife Susie. Ken, as he would come to be known, was the youngest of 5 children. The age differences between him and his older siblings, Mary, Robert, Muriel, and Erwin, ranged considerably, with Erwin 6 years older and Mary 22 years his senior.
Ken's family was all over the board in terms of age. Even his parents had a gap between them. Edwin's middle name signified his birth in 1876. Susie wasn't born until 1897.
And he had told Susie that he was younger, and it wasn't until Ken's father started getting Social Security that he told her how old he was.
But from what we know through family stories to published accounts, because in a small town like theirs, the newspapers would report on anything and everything, it was a happy marriage.
Edwin brought Susie and their still growing brood to Bellwood in 1929. He took a job at the local grain elevator, providing for his family, making sure they did not want for anything. There were birthday parties for the children, complete with cakes, presents, and lollipops wrapped in red, white, and blue ribbon for their playmates. Edwin and Susie's 25th wedding anniversary was celebrated with a lunch of glorified rice, cookies, coffee, and a white cake decorated in silver and with a miniature bride and groom. The family also held get-togethers to simply enjoy the company of friends. Mary even entertained her Sunday school class at what were called fun frolics, in which they would, on at least one occasion, watch a movie on the lawn via miniature projector. By all accounts, Bellwood was quite a pleasant place to live.
Saturday night during the warm summer months was a very special night in our young lives. The main attraction was the weekly band concert. The townspeople and the farm families from miles around gathered to hear the snappy popular tunes. The small children danced their fanciful little steps. The more sedate teenagers promenaded on the sidewalks, round and round the park, playing the eternal boy-girl game. The farmers squatted against storefronts or sat on park benches, intent on the discussion of crop prospects and farm operations. The women gathered in the 3 grocery stores to refurbish the family pantries with staples. Usually the Methodist or Catholic ladies would hold an ice cream and cake social in the park to replenish the church coffers. Dorothy Bell Becker, Bellwood, Nebraska.
Susie was a dedicated wife and mother who, in addition to managing the household, instilled in her children self-discipline as well as a sense of playfulness. Almost every mention of a Forsse family-hosted event includes the playing of games by all present. But, and probably most important, Susie imparted to Ken and his older siblings a love of the arts. Erwin won singing contests. Mary played the piano and painted in oils. Even Ken, not yet 5, is reported to have performed a vocal solo in front of a bridal shower audience.
I joke that this was the single public performance that caused Ken to spend the rest of his life shunning the spotlight. But with 4 older siblings watching over him, he was kept out of harm's way.
I've talked with some of his brothers and sisters, and they were all mothers to him. They took him places and to the movies, and his sister Mary is the one that taught him to paint when he was about 8 years old. So it's like he had a bunch of mothers and sisters, but he was always sort of an adult child.
When his brother Robert joined the ranks of the Army in 1942 to serve in the European theater of World War II, Ken was beginning grade school.
When Ken was in the 1st grade, his teacher told the kids, "We're going to make puppets. So you bring fabric from home, and then we'll make puppets." So the very next day, Ken brings fabric from home, and nobody else brings fabric. And they don't make puppets, and they don't make puppets. And I can just see Ken. He said he'd pull on the teacher's dress and said, "Teacher, teacher, when are we going to make puppets?" They never made puppets.
It says a lot that even at such a young age, Ken wanted nothing more than to create. The fact that this was centered on puppets just shows his ability early on to keep projects he was passionate about on the back burner, ready to be brought to the forefront when the right opportunity presented itself.
By 1943, Edwin, now nearing 67 years of age, decided it was time to retire and relocate. He and Susie sold their Bellwood property for $500, packed up their belongings, and everyone, including their adult children, headed west for Burbank, California.
Family life flourishes in Burbank, and amazing records of home construction are being made because this community is one of the best residential areas in the United States. Most of the homes are occupied by owners, and there are few rentals, thus accounting for a high degree of civic pride in progress and growth. Truly, Burbank is a capital-owned city in every sense of the word. Homes in this city continue to increase the attractiveness of the community with architectural beauty so well fitted to the Southern California climate. The ideal residential districts have brought about a more rapid expansion in the ever-increasing number of new homes. Strict building requirements, rigidly enforced, have brought to home construction the very highest standards of perfection. From Burbank, California, gateway to the San Fernando Valley.
Being in a new city, a new house, and a new school should have been exciting for Ken, but he found himself frustrated. Considered advanced for his age while in Bellwood, Ken had enjoyed the start of his formal education, but once he began school in Burbank, he started to fall behind.
From the rest of the time in his education, Ken had difficulty. I think he was playing catch up because he didn't like school. The only thing he liked was drawing and, of course, recess. But he would definitely have not been the same person if he'd stayed in Bellwood, Nebraska.
Ken retreated into himself and spent much of his time finding artistic influences to foster his imagination. He would have been reading works such as Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and Dr. Seuss's Horton Hatches an Egg. Ken was taking in these stories, allowing them to saturate his young mind with fantastical worlds and characters. What's more, he was drawing inspiration from the illustrations of John Tenniel, W. W. Denslow, John R. Neal, and the Good Doctor himself. Early success came in the form of winning an award for a watercolor he painted for a Parent Teachers Association sponsored event through the Burbank Elementary Schools. Ken's work was exhibited on May 26, 1944 at the Public Library. He was just 7 years old.
Here's a kid with creativity oozing from his fingertips, but not fully understood by his father. And the nearly 60-year age gap is probably where that stems from. So there wasn't that closeness you'd expect to find between a father and his son.
Ken's dad was good with his hands. Carpentry skills he likely picked up by watching his father, Jonas, who worked as a janitor, a hardware store clerk, and at one point even owned a broom factory. But when he dies, Edwin is 9 years old. Then, on top of that, Edwin's grandfather, Major Eric Forsse, the Civil War hero, passes away just 3 years later. So Edwin is left without a father figure, which likely, in addition to the generational gap, led to the type of relationship he and Ken had while the latter was growing up.
Edwin would pass away when Ken was 21 years old, never getting to see his son's eventual success. But despite everything, he loved his son, and Ken clearly learned a great deal from his father about being a responsible individual who understood the importance of hard work and determination.
You dump the fertilizer on my garden, you're the rake that up and slaps me in the face. You're the spoon of medicine that I must swallow, you're the one who always keeps me in my place. You're the one that lets me do the things that you decide are best. You're the one who says, don't imitate the actions of the rest. You're the one who drags me from my bed when I just want to sleep. You're the one who says, you'll stand up tall if your roots are deep. You dump the fertilizer on my garden. You're the rake that up and slaps me in the face. You're the spoon of medicine that I must swallow. You're the one who always keeps me in my place. You're the one who kicks me from the nest just like a tiny sparrow. You're the one who showed me how to always find the straight and narrow. You're the one who's given me the many chances that I've had. You're the reason why I can now say, I understand it, Dad.
Around 1949, at the age of 13, Ken sought out a part-time job with L&J Wood Products, a business co-founded by Leon Heller and Jerry Grunvig. The company specialized in baby furniture, specifically children's toilet seats. Ken served as a laborer, learning the basics behind the designing and construction processes. He was even present when Heller developed a spring-based rocking horse prototype. Unfortunately, L&J were beaten to the market by Wonder Products' similar, and now famous, Wonder Horse. While he did not end up staying with them long, Ken was exceptionally grateful to the Heller family for employing him. He later expressed his gratitude by gifting them an oil painting of his, which ended up traveling everywhere with the family as they moved around the world. In 1954, Ken graduated from Burbank High School. His yearbook lists no sports teams or student clubs of which he was a member. Art was listed as his favorite subject. He was 17 years old, had no plans for college, but knew it was time to find a job. Knowing he wanted to be an artist, Ken's number one choice was Walt Disney Productions, located right in the heart of Burbank since its founding in the 1920s.
Animation has fascinated me since I realized here was a new means of expression, an unlimited storytelling medium. Many cartoon characters had taken shape on my drawing board. Perhaps the best known of these is Mickey Mouse. Mickey's universal appeal brought the recognition we needed and paved the way for expansion. We began to grow, to develop new ideas. We began to see a new horizon for animation. The Silly Symphonies were our proving ground and a springboard to the animated feature. The first was Snow White. Its success proved animation was becoming a fine art. Walt Disney.
With no prior professional experience, Ken found employment in the company's mailroom. He could not have known that this was to be a short excursion. At the time, the studio had released 14 animated features, was finishing up Lady and the Tramp, and was behind schedule on Sleeping Beauty, which had been announced back in 1950. To complete the film, a call went out for additional artists. Ken took the animation test, passed, and got himself hired as an in-betweener.
A chief animator makes the first drawing, say of Pluto starting to trip. Then he makes the 50th drawing of Pluto at the climax of his fall. The in-betweener spends his day filling in the action, each drawing slightly different. As he progresses, he flips the drawings with a finger to test the smooth following through of the action. A day's work is from 30 to 50 drawings on 8 by 10-inch paper. Thousands and thousands of these drawings go into a cartoon, and the amazing thing about it is that it only lasts about 3 minutes. After the in-betweeners finish their drawings, they go to the inkers, a small army of girls who trace the drawings on transparent paper and lay them over a background. Then each drawing is photographed. Wally Trabing, the Santa Cruz Sentinel.
As an in-betweener, Ken was making between $55 and $60 a week, about what errand boys were earning at other Hollywood studios. Even though it was tedious, grueling work with literally hundreds of sketches being tossed in the trash on a weekly basis, Ken relished it. He and his coworkers had grown up watching Disney's shorts and features, so there was a desire to please their boss, who was watching the budget on Sleeping Beauty steadily increase. It eventually totaled $6 million, making it nearly twice as expensive as each of the studio's preceding 3 animated features.
It's an ultra widescreen presentation. In terms of visual components, it's one of the most complex films that Disney's put together. It has elaborate backgrounds. It has many moving characters on the screen at the same time. That's just a tremendous workforce. In many ways, Sleeping Beauty is the film that kind of broke the production cycle of Disney animation. All the films that come after that are much smaller efforts, like 101 Dalmatians. So the investment for animation during this period goes in over years and years and years. And the Disney studio would like to get the investment out with ticket sales and profit at the end of it, but they can't do that until the film's finished. So there's always an effort to move it out into theaters.
But no, we weren't under any pressure. I mean, we were just doing what we normally did, and the amount of drawings every day. We were supposed to do 30 in-betweens a day, and so our responsibility was to do that. There was a lot of reasons it was over budget. The director at that time, Eric Larson, was trying to please Walt, and what happened was Eric was very, very picky. Everything had to be perfect.
The film, visually unlike anything before it, portrayed a mythical kingdom in medieval Europe. The studio had sent researchers to work contacting museums, scouring libraries for photographs and old prints, descriptive literature, and ancient manuscripts. The results of their findings helped simplify the work of the storymen and artists and contributed to the overall beauty and striking realism of the completed production. Disney said his people had developed new styles, new designs, new concepts. They have advanced the art of animation to a point where it can truly be called the art of living, moving paintings. With production being declared complete in 1957, the studio found its animation department swelling with artists it no longer needed to keep on payroll. Many in-betweeners, including Ken, found themselves suddenly unemployed.
The studio was clearly advancing the art of film animation, and I was very excited about being a part of it. But after about 2 years there as an in-betweener, I realized that until all the original artists and technicians retired or died off, there wasn't much chance for me to advance into more creative work. I just didn't feel like waiting 30 years to become an animator. I could have followed the traditional path of going to a smaller studio, but live action seemed more spontaneous and exciting to me at that point. Ron Cobb.
Ken had known Ron since high school, being a year ahead of him, and shared his friend's sentiments about not wanting to face a struggling career in animation. So while some of their former coworkers felt lost and without direction, Ken and Ron came up with a plan. Having experienced how far they could go with just getting by on raw talent, the two intended to gain instruction, to learn from an expert, and they knew the apprenticeship they wanted.
I was getting tired of seeing statues of victory triumphant and exalted. Victory in war always means a tremendous loss to the victor as well as the vanquished. And to me, a statue of victory isn't true in spirit unless it tells the whole story. Ellis Berman Sr., April 26, 1936.
Ellis Berman Sr. had made a name for himself in the Midwest as a commissioned artist of larger-than-life statues long before he moved his family to California. He broke into Hollywood with MGM before quickly moving over to Universal Studios. Beginning as a sculptor, Berman eventually made it into the prop shop, creating prosthetic pieces for Jack Pierce, the man best remembered as the makeup artist behind Boris Karloff's iconic look in 1931's Frankenstein. Berman would help bring characters such as the Wolfman, the Mummy, and Quasimodo to the silver screen. He even had the opportunity to redo Karloff's mask for Lon Chaney Jr., who eventually took over the role the former had made famous.
I like monsters better than some people I know. My friends don't share my enthusiasm for monsters. The neighbors don't like them either. Ever since I was working on a couple of monsters in the backyard several years ago, we have been known in our neighborhood as the Horrible Bermans. Ellis Berman Sr.
And so my father worked at the studio until I think it was 1948, and they had a big strike. And my father wasn't very much of a union person, so he kept on going to work and eventually left the union because they came down on him pretty hard, and he became an independent. We all worked, all of us kids worked in my dad's shop, making rubber Indian arrowheads and clubs and tomahawks and rubber rifles and swords and spears and battle axes.
Ken and Ron had found their mentor in Berman. Their introduction to this jack-of-all-trades came through his son, Ellis Jr., a fellow graduate of Burbank High School. Berman Sr. was intrigued by these two young men, fresh off their stint from Walt Disney Productions.
They were infatuated with all the stuff my dad did, so they would come there on afternoons and on the weekends. What they did is they learned how to make plaster molds. They learned what kind of separators to use and what kind of paint would stick to rubber. And because my father, he created all this stuff back then, and he was brilliant in that he was so versatile.
Berman Sr. took Ken and Ron under his wing, teaching them what it would take if they wanted a career in live-action movies. Their mentor believed that if one wanted to make it in his line of work, they would have to be an artist, makeup man, engineer, carpenter, electrician, sculptor, and general handyman, all rolled into one.
The greatest thing my father gave me is this confidence to take on something you had no idea how you were going to do it. I think one of the most difficult things in doing the work that I've done, and to try to take on a job and in a way that, again, you don't know how it's going to be done. You take it on and you get to invent it. I think it's the scariest and the most thrilling thing to do.
We worked in rubber and fiberglass, making movie props, and it wasn't too long after that Ken and I started working on our own, got involved with Roger Corman and did some tentative designs for a number of films. They were far too elaborate and expensive for Corman. We never actually got anything on film, but we did some beautiful mock-ups and proved our abilities to ourselves. We wanted to do skin-tight chrome robot costumes with everything operating, an early C-3PO. I had it all worked out with Ken, who was an amazing technician and could make anything I designed. We worked out of his garage and spent a number of years trying to sell Corman and others on the use of extraordinary new materials, plastics, rubbers, and latex, but we were so far ahead of our time that no one was willing to pay that kind of money. Ron Cobb.
The duo made one final pitch to the king of the B-movies, purely out of desperation to break into the industry and gain exposure. They would build a weird-looking monster that Ron would design, at cost, for $400. Corman again balked at what he considered too steep a price. Night of the Blood Beast would be made without Ken Forsse and Ron Cobb.
Middle-class Burbank life seemed bleak and unexciting. The future held even less promise. I began to notice out of the corner of my eye distant vistas of fantasy, of a world out there glimpsed through the wonderful window of television and EC Comics. I daydreamed and nurtured my fantasies, and to make them more real, I drew. At the same time, I became introverted and waited for something to happen. Ron Cobb.
I suddenly found myself the winner of the International Fantasy Award, presented as a fitting climax to the 15th World Science Fiction Convention. A backwash from the convention was a visit from an American who drove out all the way in a taxi from London to see me last week, filling 76 Sandfield with strange men and stranger women. But this Mr. Ackerman brought some really astonishingly good pictures and some remarkable color photographs. They've apparently toured America shooting mountain and desert scenes that seem to fit the story. It looks as if business might be done. J.R.R. Tolkien, September 11th, 1957.
The Lord of the Rings was the magnum opus of a quiet, seemingly uninteresting philologist who, had he not invented his Middle-earth legendarium, would likely have fallen into obscurity, remembered only by the students he taught at Oxford University. But J.R.R. Tolkien's follow-up to his 1937 book The Hobbit went on to become bestsellers, changing the fantasy genre forever. When the trilogy was discovered upon its initial publication, the Mr. Ackerman mentioned in Tolkien's letter to his son Christopher immediately formed a plan to adapt the books into a film.
The fan who combines pleasure with his business as a writer and literary agent is Forrest J. Ackerman of Los Angeles. He started his first science fiction fan club in San Francisco in 1929. That same year, as a boy of 13, he sold his first science fiction story to win a newspaper contest. Science fiction, Mr. Ackerman said, may be as old as the caveman. In my opinion, in caveman days, someone came home and carved on the wall, "What a magnificent idea it would be if you could capture fire and carry it around. Warm your homes with it." His own library, he said, contains 50,000 science fiction books and 100,000 magazines. The Press Courier.
Ackerman was kind of a science fiction superfan who became an institution in and of himself. He was the literary agent of Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov, two of the biggest names in the genre, and is, to this day, the only recipient of the Hugo Award for #1 fan personality.
When he gets his hands on The Lord of the Rings, and we're talking about 1955, 1956, Ackerman just knows this is a masterpiece. The books wouldn't even become hugely popular here in the United States until the 1960s, but he foresaw their appeal beyond the initial target audience.
Ackerman convinced an acquaintance, Morton Grady Zimmerman, to put together a storyline, compressing the trilogy into a single film. But he knew words would not be enough. If he wanted to wow Tolkien and convince him to agree to the project, Ackerman needed visuals.
And he happens to know Ron Cobb. So Ackerman approaches him about putting together a portfolio of images that might pique Tolkien's interest. And Ron, being a loyal guy, says he's in, but that his buddy Ken Forsse needs to be included. When Ackerman finds out about what type of stuff these two guys can create, the style of the proposed movie changes, and he relays this to his screenwriter.
Zimmerman began mapping out the look of the film. In his production notes, he writes that, in the course of this picture, the topographical geography will be a combination of live, animated, and miniature. Places such as the Shire, home of the Hobbits, was to be shot on a live set. Fangorn Forest would be fully animated, and Mordor, home of the story's main antagonist, was going to be a combination of a miniature set model enhanced by animation with very little, if any, live-action footage. Characters would be done depending on what was practical. Examples include the hobbits and elves being brought to life in animated form, dwarves and men portrayed by live actors, and the Ents being done via animation and what Zimmerman describes as wire, indicating a combination of visual elements.
Ron's job is to figure out how this stuff is going to look on paper. Ken is the one responsible for figuring out how they're going to take these drawings and turn them into physical, three-dimensional pieces. By no means is any of this easy, and you have to remember that Ackerman hasn't even gone to England to speak with Tolkien yet. They're working on this based on the hope that a deal with the author can be made. But one is 20, the other is 19, and they want this to happen so very badly.
3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. In the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. In the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. So begins a motion picture 3 hours long designed for adults and children alike. A narrator with deep, resonant tones recites the verse above while projected on the screen is a gloomy scene. Ashen gray clouds hang heavily upon and swirl ominously around tall, dark mountains whose surfaces are bleak and barren. The camera dwells upon the tallest of these mountains, set in the center of a large, desolate plain, filled with tiny holes and vents, from which clouds of black smoke and reddish-orange tinted flames belch forth, adding to the gloominess of the scene. As the narrator nears the end of the prologue, the camera pans the entire valley, coming to rest upon the Tower of the Evil Eye, resting place of the Dark Lord of Mordor, Sauron. The narration ends with the camera dollying in on the tower to a tight shot of a small, ink-black window, Barely discernible is a shadowy shape of an enormous eye, unblinking, evil, and unmoving. A large golden ring, unadorned, large as the eye staring from the tower, begins to form and take shape upon the screen, superimposed over the window and the eye. It glows with first a bright, hallowed type of light, which flicks back and forth to gloomier and more evil colors. The title, The Fellowship of the Rings, is superimposed upon the screen, passing through the golden ring, and is in a bright, blood red, severely contrasting the dark background and band of gold. Morton Grady Zimmerman.
Aside from the title change, for which the reason is completely unknown, it's not a bad opening. The problem was that the rest of it is a complete mess.
Zimmerman asked Ron to create a storyboard of 300 pencil sketches, 100 per book. He also wanted 25 fairly detailed drawings of specific moments, such as the siege of Minas Tirith, which he misspells consistently. The goal was to have all of this completed by the time Ackerman was ready to leave for England. How many were actually completed is unknown, but as Ken and Ron were working on some model mechanical orcs about a yard high, Ackerman headed across the Atlantic to present what his team had put together. Tolkien loved Ron's drawings, but detested the storyline upon a full reading of it.
I should say Zimmerman is quite incapable of adapting the book. He is hasty, insensitive, and impertinent. He does not read books. It seems to me evident that he has skimmed through the Elar at a great pace and then constructed his storyline from partly confused memories, and with the minimum of references back to the original. I feel very unhappy about the extreme silliness and incompetence of Zimmerman, and his complete lack of respect. J.R.R. Tolkien, April 8th, 1958.
After a long letter to Ackerman detailing point by point his issues with Zimmerman's storyline, the whole project collapsed. Ken and Ron had lost out on what might have been the opportunity of their lifetimes given how The Lord of the Rings became a global phenomenon. Ken would have to file this most recent failure away and accept the silver lining that he had gained additional experience in his chosen profession. More importantly, he had read the trilogy, gaining a greater insight into myth-making and world-building, two skills which would become vital down the road. But in the meantime, he and Ron needed to find another project to work on, still trying to get their feet through the door and into show business.
Two young Spokane men who left here just a little more than 2 years ago to seek fame and fortune flew back to the city yesterday in a chartered plane. They are Bud Bankson and Larry Jackson. With them was Dave DeTiche, animator, artist, and writer with Walt Disney the last 12 years. The three men have formed a corporation and are a going concern in the production of television shows, radio programs, and motion picture shorts. Their first venture, and one which appears headed for success, is Ser Gadzooks, a television puppet series strictly on the comedy side and slanted for the youngsters. The Spokane Daily Chronicle, August 3rd, 1954.
Norman Bud Bankson and Larry Earl Jackson, veterans of World War II and the Korean War respectively, had teamed up in 1951 to co-write several well-reviewed PTA-sponsored minstrel shows before heading off to New York City to work on the Jackie Gleason Show. Shortly thereafter, Bankson's memoir, I Should Live So Long, an account of his time in the war, became a bestseller, and he embarked on a speaking tour to promote it. With a big literary success under his belt, Bankson convinced Jackson to head for California in order to break into Hollywood. There they became acquainted with Dave DeTiche, originator of Disney's Rugged Bear character. Prior to their return to Spokane in 1954, another partner, Mike Mosier, the creator of the hugely successful Space Patrol property, had been hit by a car and killed. Without his clout, they began to lose traction. Their fortunes would change in 1958. At the start of the year, DeTiche married Phyllis Bounds, Walt Disney's niece, who was on her uncle's payroll as a television special coordinator. DeTiche called Bankson and Jackson to tell them they should give Ser Gadzooks another try. The problem was that none of them had any experience in designing and building puppets and sets. Fortunately, DeTiche knew of two former in-betweeners who were looking for work.
Ron's thinking that this could be the job that gets their careers going full steam ahead. For Ken, this is the chance to fulfill a childhood dream and get paid to do it. But the way people perceived puppetry since he was in the first grade had changed, and you can attribute that to television.
You're telling I? Hello, darling.
Oh, no, Ollie.
Hello, darling. No, no. Really?
In a few movies now.
Yeah. Oh, look, kids, I just decided I like my scarf. Oh, it's lovely.
Looks like mine.
It is. Fran, it's yours. You don't care, do you?
Oh, I guess not if you're careful.
Before 1950 rolls around, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie may be the best-known names in television from the Atlantic seaboard to the Mississippi River. A puppet show in a class by itself, Burr Tillstrom's Kuklapolitan Players are a smash hit. The 9 hand marionettes which Tillstrom manipulates from behind a curtain have become as real to thousands of televiewers of all ages as Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd are to radio listeners. The only live player in the troupe is lissom Fran Allison, ad-lib perfectionist and a former Iowa rural school teacher who made her mark in radio in the role of Aunt Fanny. All voices, except that of Fran, of course, are supplied by Tillstrom. Anton Remina, The Chicago Tribune.
Broadcast between 1947 and 1957, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie was one of the most popular programs in the early years of television, enjoyed by audiences of all ages. It served as an introduction to puppetry for children across the United States and was most certainly watched by Ken Forsse. It was unscripted and unrehearsed, an approach said to have benefited the show by providing spontaneity, informality, and charm. As he watched the program, Ken would have paid attention to the simplistic construction of the hand puppets, knowing he wanted his to be more elaborate, and he would have taken note of the character-building morals which were slipped in for the younger viewers. His 2 issues were that the show took place within the confines of a traditional puppet theater, and there was a human character present. Despite Tillstrom's view that Fran served as a link between reality and fantasy, which he felt added charm, Ken wanted those 2 realms to exist independent of one another, so that the world of the puppets could be more visually complete and explored.
Now then, one last question of a political nature. Thinking in terms of the 1964 presidential race, who do you think will be elected? You know, what's the first name for president that comes into your head?
Washington.
Ho ho! Always a snappy and humorous reply from David Brinkley.
Brinkley?
Yes, of course, Brinkley.
A puppet career begun while in high school has proven an interesting art to Jim Henson, who is in his 3rd year at the University of Maryland, where he is studying practical art. Jim Henson's puppet talent has enabled him to tour U.S. Air Force bases in Iceland, Bermuda, and the Azores with the Muppets. The Delta native devised his own method of making puppets. He begins with the personality and then visualizes the puppet, which he creates from plastic, wood, chamois skin, sheep fur, and liquid rubber. The Delta Democrat Times.
If Kukla, Fran, and Ollie introduced an entire generation of Americans to the art of puppetry, Jim Henson's Muppets took things to another level. Starting in 1955 with Sam and Friends, a short-form local series out of Washington, D.C., Henson and his co-performer-turned-wife, Jane Nebel, eventually took the country by storm, appearing on late-night talk shows and in commercials for brands such as Wilkins Coffee and Cramel Milk. Jane Henson once said, "Jim saw that the puppet is as powerful as a human being, and in fact is more powerful, less concerned about what it looks like, more direct, more able to go to the heart of things." Indeed, one look at a Muppet, and few people ever gave a second thought to the traditional puppets of the Tillstrom persuasion.
Part of what made Jim Henson really good at what he did was partly because he didn't know what the rules were. Jim Henson was not a puppeteer. He didn't want to be a puppeteer. He didn't know anything about performing puppets. So when Jim gets on TV performing puppets, he figures out immediately that what works really well is when you're doing puppets for television, you don't need the puppet theater. That the 4 sides of the screen are essentially your puppet theater. So you can throw that puppet theater out. Now the 4 sides of the TV defines the performance, captures that performance.
Ken's early exposure to the Muppets is limited, but he's impressed with how Henson's able to shift the public's idea of what puppetry could be and what the puppets themselves could do. He especially enjoyed the humor as well, but he feels that more can be done in terms of exploring the puppets' surroundings and keeping them self-contained without live-action actors interacting with them.
With Dettige, Bankson, and Jackson working together on the script to the now titled The Adventures of Sir Gadzooks, Ron was responsible for designing the characters in order for Ken to sculpt and cast the latex puppets and build the settings.
Waldo was a jumping dragon. A jumping, laughing dragon. A jumping, laughing, friendly dragon. And he never looked where he was going. One day Waldo was jumping, higher and higher, down a path through the woods. Of course he wasn't looking where he was going, and so he hit a mountain. And then he fell upon a knight, who dropped to the ground with a loud clank and a thud. Dave Dettige, from Waldo, the Jumping Dragon.
The script to the Sir Gadzooks pilot is lost to time, but Dettige's 1964 short children's story and Ron Cobb's surviving drawings help put a basic plot line together. The titular knight has a run-in with a dragon, who is by no means a malevolent creature. The two tussle, but in the end, Sir Gadzooks realizes his perceived foe is a gentle giant who ends up being threatened by a wizard and his dim-witted henchmen. Sir Gadzooks, righteous to the bone, ends up defending the dragon.
And the dragon may or may not also be named Waldo, like the jumping one was in Dettige's Tell a Tales book. But the name actually appears in two separate projects Ken ends up working on later on, so take that for what it's worth. But what's really cool is that a version of Ken's actual model for Sir Gadzooks, rendered as this kind of potbelly knight, still exists. And what's incredibly important is that Ken is envisioning a full-bodied puppet, still operated by hand, but one where you'd see the entire character, from head to toe, without ever seeing the puppeteer.
For reasons unknown, The Adventures of Sir Gadzooks was not picked up for production by any network or investor. So a second pilot project by the Dettige, Bankson, Jackson team, The Flying Dutchman, a science fiction story, was put together. Ron again did the concept art, with Ken doing the production design and set construction. The story centered on a submarine that could blast up out of the ocean and become an aircraft and a spacecraft. This too was not picked up by anyone. These two projects would be the last ones Ken and Ron ever worked on together in any meaningful way. Ron Cobb would go on to become one of the most sought-after artists in Hollywood, working on such films as Dark Star, the original Star Wars, Alien, and Conan the Barbarian. The two young men from Burbank would remember their formative years fondly, reminiscing about one another in interviews even decades later.
The problems that need solving keep appearing endlessly. So may the battles that I fight be chosen carefully. Don't let me battle windmills because of blinding pride. Don't let me just get swept away in some new frenzied tide. But let me seek solutions that will live beyond my time, and let my impassioned reason be tempered with some rhyme. And if I build sandcastles, let them be upon the beach, and if this journey teaches me, then let me also teach. I ask these things of one who grants responsibility. I ask these things of only one. I ask these things of me.
The answer to Ken's question about what he should do with his life came in the form of a letter from the federal government. On November 18, 1959, Earl Kenneth Forsse joined the ranks of the United States Army. As he began his stint, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. Prior to the demise of their collaborative efforts, Bud Bankson made an offhand comment about the two monkeys the U.S. had recently launched into space. If they had gotten lost, he asked, what might have become of them? Ken would spend the next 4 years mulling it over.
Army Private Earl K. Forsse, 23, son of Mrs. Susie Forsse, 427 East Stanford Road, completed 8 weeks of advanced individual missile training at the Artillery and Missile Center, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Forsse was trained as a crewman on the Army's Corporal Surface-to-Surface Missile. The Valley Times, May 18, 1960.
With the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union over a decade old by the time Ken was drafted, much attention and funds were being paid to the area of national defense. All training on the Corporal missile was being done at Fort Sill, and those responsible for their maintenance and potential operation, like Ken, were deployed overseas helping to preserve the peace. It was said that a few battalions of the Corporal missile equaled the firepower of all the artillery fired on all fronts in World War II. Ken hated the Oklahoman winter he experienced, especially on nights when he was on guard duty. His last day at Fort Sill was April 8, 1960. By the time he shipped out to Italy, he had received one distinction during basic training, marksman badge with rifle bar.
He was anti-gun. You don't need a gun, you don't need to shoot a gun, you don't need to have a gun, you don't need to hunt for your food. That's what grocery stores are for. And never spoke about his marksmanship award in the military whatsoever.
American and Italian missile battalions, together with Italian mountain infantry and American engineers with black boxes of atomic explosives, give the impression they could hold off any advancing army from at least one corner of Western Europe. A look at NATO's small but versatile Southern European task force in field maneuvers gives reason to believe even the Soviet army would have trouble in this part of the continent with or without 5,000-mile rockets. The Los Angeles Times, May 2nd, 1961.
With tensions between the two superpowers heating up, Ken took refuge in his art. Despite the mounting turmoil, which would culminate in the Berlin crisis of 1961, he continued what he was best at, creating. Ken helped build officers' clubs, did work at a small theater for the troops, and found the time to sculpt caricatures of his fellow soldiers and superiors, earning the nickname Disney.
You know, it doesn't shock me that he would figure out a way to honor his beliefs with being kind to people. He was designing things and creating things and making the military a better place for those around him, enriching their lives even in that atmosphere.
After a little over 2 years of active service, Private First Class Earl Kenneth Forse's tenure in the United States Army came to an end. He was honorably discharged on February 19, 1962, at Fort Hamilton, New York. Upon his separation, Ken made arrangements to return to California. He was now 25 years old, and he wanted more than ever to realize his dreams of being a professional artist in the entertainment industry.
For most people, the very mention of 1929 sends goose pimples up and down the spine. However, there is a bright side. For instance, our address on Wilshire Boulevard is 1929, and we haven't seen a goose of any kind for weeks. As a matter of fact, we've seen nothing but smiling, satisfied customers oohing and eyeing at the beautiful artificial flower arrangements and gifts in our showroom. We invite you to come in and see the bright side of 1929 at Robert Martin Artificial Flowers, the Santa Monica Outlook.
Robert S. Anselmo and Joe Sacchetti had been running Brentwood floral arrangements before meeting Martin, Tex, Beauchamp, an investor looking to expand their operation. They closed their shop, leased 1929 Wilshire Boulevard, and opened a new retail outlet, specializing in top-of-the-line artificial flowers imported from Italy. Robert and Beauchamp named it after themselves, with Sacchetti serving as a silent partner.
And I hired this girl to assist in making flower arrangements and watching the shop when I was gone. And one day she said that I should meet her dad. And I said, why should I meet your dad? Well, he has a company called Universal Products, and he has some very interesting products that I should take a look at and maybe even sell it in the flower shop on Wilshire. I went down there, had an appointment, and met her dad, and he said, I want you to meet someone, and that was Ken Forsse. We were talking, and I said, well, what is your product? And he said, well, take a look in back. On the wall was a large metal shield. And I said, well, that's interesting. Why would I be interested in that? And he said, well, go touch it. Well, come to find out, it looked like steel, but it was fiberglass.
Ken had been spinning his wheels since being discharged from the Army. Universal Products specialized in making just about everything, from fiberglass replicas to cookbooks. When the two met, they would combine Ken's artistic talents with Robert's ability to run a business. Thus was born their product line, Artistry in Dimension.
Superb representation of art and artifacts from cultures both past and present. Chosen for their enduring appeal, these works have been fashioned with thoughtful care. Using age-old techniques, special attention is paid to the hand finishing of each surface. Be it stone, metal, or wood, the aging of effects of time have not been overlooked. From solid Egyptian stone relief to the boldly beautiful implements of heraldic battle, from classic to primitive, from all ages here is Artistry in Dimension, tastefully recreated to enhance today's modern decor.
This had not been Ken's first foray into the replica business. Prior to being drafted, he had started an informal company with another in-betweener.
Almost by chance, the Los Angeles County Museum has become the recipient of a welcome contribution of scholarly research from George Edwards, the translation of the Stela of Shen. Mr. Edwards' interest in hieroglyphs dates from his study of art history at the Chouinard Art Institute. Mr. and Mrs. Edwards and their 3 small children live in Encino, in a house which they call Little San Simeon, as it displays a collection of armor and weapons from the Middle Ages and the Orient, a collection of swords from China, Japan, and Korea, and Mrs. Edwards' collection of wood carvings. Alice McNully.
Ken and my dad were like 2 peas in a pod. These guys were soft-spoken, but so brilliant, both of them. My earliest memories of them would be speaking in their low voices and tones, but just being really excited about some new thing that they were going to make or invent. They would set up workshops, and the first workshop I remember was actually in our garage in Encino, so there was no shop. It was there that they started doing the art replicas of armor. I remember molds all over the place in the garage.
With George coming back on board to help Ken maintain authenticity in the fiberglass pieces, Artistry in Dimension was poised to become quite an endeavor. They were offering 7 different types of metal finishes, 8 for stone, and at least 5 varieties of wood. Aging the materials to look like antiques was not an issue.
Authentic items can be reproduced from originals or photographs. Any item can be reproduced or created from an artist's conception and authentically detailed to match that period. Each item is carefully hand-finished to create a desired effect to bring out the most minute details and to highlight and emphasize the minute details to enhance the beauty of the items.
Ken had an idea of creating a suit of armor, and what we did is we went to Western Costume and we rented a real suit of armor. So we brought the suit of armor to the Universal Product Shop, and we drilled out all of the rivets. We made a casting of over 200 items that were part of this suit of armor. We put it all back together, and we touched up each rivet to make sure it looked like the original steel, and returned the suit of armor back to Western Costume within 24 hours, so we didn't get charged for another day. That gave us all the molds we needed to create a fiberglass suit of armor, which we did. And at that time, there was a store called Robinson's Department Store, and we had the suit of armor there as a customer attraction to our line of products.
Items for their catalog ranged from as low as $26 to as high as $245. Unfortunately, Artistry in Dimension did not last very long, but while the product line had failed to catch on the way Robert had hoped, Ken had concluded that his talents were being wasted at Universal Products. He quit to answer a newspaper want ad. It was time to rejoin the House of Mouse, but not in the animation department. Ken Forsse was going to Disneyland.
An entirely new medium of 3-dimensional entertainment was unveiled Wednesday at a press preview of the Enchanted Tiki Room in Disneyland. A unique system, christened Audio Animatronics, has been developed which produces a combination of sound effects, including human voices and music, fully synchronized to the movements of any objects, trees, birds, flowers, animals, and even human figures. The end result, as employed in the Enchanted Tiki Room, is a musical fantasy with more than 200 audio animatronic performers. Each bird, flower, and wooden tiki statue is given lifelike music and humanized voices and mannerisms. The San Bernardino County Sun, June 21st, 1963.
WED Enterprises, named after its founder, Walter Elias Disney, fulfilled the dream Ken had of breaking into the entertainment industry. As an Imagineer, he would now be part of the team of men and women responsible for creating the attractions, shows, and everything else in between for the happiest place on Earth, then nearing its 10th anniversary. The opening of the Enchanted Tiki Room was the beginning of a movement at WED to give the park a much more cinematic and immersive look and feel, with Disney himself leading the charge.
I sat in meetings with Walt, sometimes up to 4 or 5 hours, and I never said a thing. I just observed and tucked it all away, and I really taught myself to be a good sponge and absorb every possible thing I could. But Walt was really beautiful about it because he loved his guys, and each one of us was put into a category. So he knew exactly what our strengths were and what our weaknesses were. And again, he was a king of common sense. And that's the one thing I loved about him. He had so much common sense, it was unbelievable. And you couldn't second guess him.
The Enchanted Tiki Room was one of Ken's first projects. The finished bird figures from the attraction would have first been sculpted by Ken and his fellow Imagineers, like Leota Toombs, in the model shop.
And the feathering would have taken months. There was a whole alley specifically to make these models look like birds. And my best guess would be that Ken would be involved in that in terms of putting on the beautiful plumage that make these pieces of mechanics look like living animals.
Just as we had to learn to make our animated cartoons talk, we had to find a way to make these characters talk too. Now, to accomplish this, we created a new type of animation. So new that we had to invent a new name for it.
Audio animatronics?
Right, audio animatronics.
Disneyland's Jungle River Cruise, already Walt Disney's most popular attraction with more than 20 million passengers in 8 years, will add even more exciting sights this summer. Just completed is the fun-filled bathing pool of Indian elephants. Getting the most attention is a happy-looking elephant swaying playfully and squirting a stream of water through his trunk beneath a huge waterfall. The elephants are created in Disneyland's staff and plastics shops, with plastic hides so real it almost takes an expert to tell the difference. Real elephant hair is implanted in the hide to give complete authenticity. The Walt Disney animators install automatic controls and hydraulic units to make the animals move realistically in their jungle playground. Charles Ridgway, The Independent Press Telegram.
While Ken was showcasing his abilities in the model shop, he was also picking up new tricks of the trade. These were not limited to just his department. With WED being a small, intimate organization in its first decade, it was easy for someone like Ken to learn skills his former mentor, Ellis Berman Sr., had recommended that he acquire.
And so if you're in the model shop at that period and other people are doing the engineering, you can watch and see and learn how it's done. If you have that initial understanding, you then are able to follow the engineering of it as people experiment and move forward with it.
I closed my flower shop, and I was just kind of sitting at home trying to figure out what to do, watching stupid cartoons. And the thought occurred to me that, gosh, maybe we could create a television program that had more intelligence than the programs that were currently on TV at that time. And I said, I think maybe Ken can create some puppets. I talked with him about it, and he said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And he said, I know a guy by the name of Bud Bankson.
Ken had spent nearly 4 years forming an answer to Bud Bankson's question about monkeys being lost in space. Here was the basis for something within the fantasy genre that could be done with the puppets he had wanted to create back in the 1950s. Ken and Bud held several brainstorming sessions, with the former trying to convince the latter to start writing up a storyline, but Bud could not produce anything substantial, ultimately leaving the project 2 years later, his share in the property being bought out by Ken and Robert. With Bud gone, Ken found himself forced to put down on paper the ideas floating around in his mind.
And he is just not enthusiastic about it at all. Up until this point, Ken has never thought of being a writer. This was not something he had any training or practice in. There's this self-doubt about whether he's up to the task.
Ken didn't really feel like he was a writer. If you ask him what he did for a living, he would say he was an inventor. And that was whether he was inventing a story or he was inventing a product.
With great reluctance, Ken took up the pen. What would evolve into his most famous and greatest creation began out of necessity. He had watched too many opportunities in his life fade away, and he was determined to make this project work no matter what. Drawing from the books of his childhood, the movies he had grown up watching, the novels of Tolkien, and elements from previous endeavors, Ken spent the next 3 years letting his creation take its initial shape.
Simeon Griepe is a step or two away from the average being. He is wise and somewhat of a sage. His philosophical outlook allows him to regard life from a rather detached point of view. He is often whimsical and enjoys a subtle sense of humor. The antics of others more often amuse rather than disturb him. In manner of speech, Griepe is soft-spoken. He is slow to anger, quick to cool. He usually recognizes the good side of even the most impossible situation. Griepe has a wide range of knowledge, and will go far out of his way to learn something new. Most important, he believes that every creature is good until he has been proven wrong, and even then he is quick to overlook or minimize badness in others. Indeed, Greep is the catalyst of our story, uniting everyone and everything. Grubby is Greep's very good friend and buddy, and has been for many years. He is a master mechanic and is quite good at doing things with his hands, which is fortunate since he has 12 of them. Grubby is by no means slow-witted, although he likes to give that impression at times. He also enjoys a pun, an uncomplicated jest, or a good though harmless practical joke. At times he exhibits a certain dumbness which can be attributed to the fact that his knowledge of literature, humanities, and the like falls far short of his skill in things manual. Grubby claims to be a complete coward, yet he actually is quite capable of heroism, should the occasion demand it. He loves music and is apt to spend hours singing and playing most any kind of instrument. Grubby is a warm-hearted, sentimental creature and provides for the most part the comedy relief of our story. Newton Gimmick is an expert in many things, or so he believes. His main interest is science, and he spends most of his time inventing new and wonderful things, which usually have been invented long before by someone else. Gimmick is an elderly gentleman with a kindly nature. He is a bit puttery and vague, somewhat absent-minded, and naive as a child insofar as villainy on the part of others is concerned. Gimmick has been living in his own little world for so long that he cannot forsake the habit of at times conversing with himself. He has spent the last decade or so designing and building his greatest invention, Project X. Tweeg is the archest of all arch-villains, or he would be if it weren't for the fact that he's so emotional and somewhat clumsy as well. He can sneer with the best of them, and his wickedness is up to par. But just when things appear to be going right for him, some small mishap, such as, say, his cannon backfiring and rolling over him, causes him to become exceedingly emotional, even to the point of crying. And whoever heard of a villain who cries? Tweeg tries not to let anyone know, however, for it would greatly harm his image. For years he has tried to become a full-fledged member of FAV, the Federation of Arch-Villains, but they have allowed him to be only an apprentice member, which is like a slap in the face to Tweeg. But he keeps right on trying, looking for new ways to be mean and evil, and knowing that someday he will succeed. Bounders are annoying little varmints with the tenacity of a bulldog. Once they get a hold of something or someone, they flatly refuse to let go, no matter what. They are not too bright, however, which explains why Tweeg has been able to subdue them. He now treats them somewhat as slaves, getting them to do all sorts of dirty work. LB is the brightest of the Bounders, and so has become their leader. He is also Tweeg's right-hand man. He was dubbed LB, Lurking Bounder, because of his ability to snoop around and spy on people. He gathers all sorts of useful information in this way. LB has a bad habit of mocking people. This greatly annoys Tweeg, but all in all, LB is rather handy to have around, so Tweeg manages to put up with him. Fearful is a spungid, a species of small creatures somewhat resembling mushrooms. They are by nature very timid and go to great lengths to avoid trouble of any kind, and Fearful is no exception. As a youth, he was separated from his parents and forced to live alone in the dark forest. But even after all these years on his own, Fearful is apparently still unable to cope with the outside world. He is afraid even to set out in search of his long-lost home. Fearful's main protection lies in the fact that he is able to blend into most any kind of scenery, even to the point of changing his color. His real name is Teddy Ruxpin.
Come dream with me tonight. Let's go to far-off places and search for treasures bright. Come dream with me tonight. Let's build a giant airship and sail into the sky. Let's watch the ground so far below. Let's watch the birds as they fly by. The butterflies in springtime will lead us on our way. Exploding dandelions will brighten summer's day. And if our dream's a good one, and if our dream is right, then imagination can be real if we will dream tonight. Come dream with me tonight. Let's go to far-off places and search for treasures bright. Come dream with me tonight. Let's meet a lovely princess and stand before a king. Let's dream a great adventure and let us live that magic dream. The orange leaves of autumn will crackle in the air. In winter winter tiny snowflakes will sparkle everywhere. And if our dream's a good one, and if we see it through, then the wondrous dream we dream tonight someday just might come true.